hello. So hello to people joining. How are you? Adjust this. There we go. A bit better. Okay. Wait for some people to get here. Feel free to say hi, ask a question, no problem. Okay, that's a weird emoji. Okay, hello. Got a couple people coming in. That's not what I wanted. We had some questions that people wanted answered. Let me try to bring those up. I also send out a tweet here. I want this link. How do I get this link? Don't be shy, guys. Say hi. Let's just do this. Set some things up here. So slow. I want the link. Give me the link. I'll close that. And we're going to tweet this out so people can find us. Live now. English Hacks live stream. Questions. Okay. Hello, my friend. Yes, I'm pretty good today. How are you? Glad to see you here. Glad you can make it. I feel like I just saw you yesterday, though. Hello. Or should I say oi? As always. Yes. Good to see you here as well. And David is here. What is your drink of choice for today? Unfortunately, it's another Dr. Pepper with a busted bottom, so it doesn't sit right. But yeah, I'm having a problem because as I'm trying to get off of energy drinks, I find myself needing something, so I buy sodas, and then I get off the sodas and I go back to the energy drinks. And it's not good. So seems like a long time. Yeah, I know, right? It's like I don't talk to you every week or something, right? So yes, I don't know if we have any questions. We can keep chatting, of course, but if anybody has any specific questions, we can bring those up. Let's see here. And things. I don't know. Nobody has any questions. You guys know this is coming every week, so you have like all week to think of questions, and then I will answer them. And then nobody asks questions. That's okay. I know the reason you're here. It's just to see my beautiful face and hear my beautiful voice because I'm just so cool. You started smoking again. Oh no. Is it because I said I quit smoking? You have to balance out the universe. Um, that's unfortunate. That sucks. But what syllable is stressed? Cigarette. Cigarette. So you tell me, which one do you think is stressed? Cigarette. First. Yes. Very nice. So it would be like cigarette. We would bridge that, but I can't bridge it in the chat here. Cigarette. Sometimes I forget to put that silent H on the S sound, third vowel, cigarette. And I think actually, sometimes it's hard for me to hear double stresses. Um, sometimes I get a little confused with that. I think there's a double stress in here. I could be wrong. Um, cigarette. Okay, interesting. Cigarette. Very interesting indeed. According to the dictionary, you can stress the first syllable or the third syllable, and that actually makes sense. If you say cigarette, cigarette, that also sounds perfectly fine. This is a special word. So that's probably why I was a little confused. So you could do it this way. This is a nice opening topic. Don't smoke, kids. Or it could be this way. Cigarette. The glow stop T. Should be about right. In the sentence, I can count on you. Can I drop the T from count? Yes, that is the NT plus vowel rule. NT plus vowel linking rule or connection rule. Pretty much any time between two words, when you have an NT at the end, and then the next word starts with a vowel. So you're going to get the T will disappear. So it'd be like count on, count on, count on. Of course, I will note here, since this is a point that I feel is very important and I always want to emphasize, variation is a thing. And I'm actually coming to the conclusion that English pronunciation, in terms of like the sounds and connections, like what can happen, it's English is kind of not, how do I say? It's like everything is a range. It's a range of possibility. So there's what is most likely and what is standard. But depending on the context, emphasis, or if something just happens to come out with the full pronunciation, that's always possible, right? Because the word is count, count. So the T is supposed to be there. Normally, standard would be to glottal stop the T, count, and that's fine. And then when we get count on, you could say count on, but we don't usually do that. That one's very, very unlikely. So the T will most likely disappear, but technically, it's like we say, I really want to count on that. For some reason, you say it that way, some special reason. The T could be there, so it's possible. It depends on context is king. It's all about context. I like your vocal fry. Vocal fry. Well, it's a vocal fry. I'm so confused. Vocal fry. The only thing that I can make sense out of that is that my headset is not functioning properly, and it sounds like my voice is all buzzy and staticky. Make your fry. I don't know. You have to explain that. I have another question. Do native speakers simplify the pronunciation of that word and that word or that. Okay. Simplify. Yes. Um, I would say so. I can't speak for all native speakers because I know, for example, this word in American English, or at the very least in my how I speak in American English, it's wait, yeah, we say six, so it sounds if we're not enunciating clearly, it'll sound just like six. We just don't say the th, right? If you say 6 cents, you could push out the th. It's supposed to be there, sixth sense, but that's kind of hard to say. So 6 cents, 6 cents, and it actually will sound instead of 6 cents. In this particular case, it'll sound like this: 6 cents, cents, cents. As long as the context is clear, that doesn't matter. With the other word, so this is the plural of cloth. I just want to make this clear because this is a common mistake and problem for English learners. We also have this word, of course, which, because clothes, right, things you wear usually are made of cloth, but we have the silent E in the spelling, and the pronunciation of that is quite different. So that also gets simplified. I think we talked a little bit about that before. But cloth is, of course, we hear all the sounds there. Cloth. But when we add the S, cloths, cloths, cloths. Again, a range of sorts. You can push out that full th, very clear, enunciated, cloths, cloths. That'll make it nice and clear, nice and easy to understand. In reality, we're going to go as far as dropping the th, but you might kind of like lightly brush like close to a th sound on your way to the s. That's another thing that can happen. So you could either do cloths, cloths, see, it's like a really light th, or just cloths without any th. I think brushing the th is probably the most common. But if the context is clear, like, can you get me some more cloths? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. So that would be like, very nice. But seriously, what is vocal fry? I'm so confused. Maybe it's something like that I'm just like not realizing, but it's super simple and obvious. Do. Any other questions? Get rid of that. Actually, I probably shouldn't have closed that. Oh well. So there's sure more people here. It really sucks. I'm so confused because like here on YouTube, like I have, a number of you guys who are commenting like, "Oh, this is really great material," like blah blah blah. Like there's even new um, a new subscriber recently, Elmi, who also joined Patreon, and he said it's like best material on YouTube. I don't know if he's here right now or not, but I'm just like, okay, awesome. Like that makes me feel good. But then why don't I even have 1,000 subscribers? Same thing on TikTok. Like I'm posting TikToks more regularly now, and I got a comment on one of my videos earlier of somebody saying like, "How is this channel not viral?" And I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. So, if you guys, I had to charge my phone there. Is it charging? Yeah. If you guys, want to share my videos and stuff, that would also help me. But of course, you don't have to do that. Would a creaky voice make more sense? It's kind of like morning voice. I would probably call it my lazy voice. I don't really notice if I'm speaking any differently. It's just like, I don't know. I feel a little bit out of it today. And there's a reason for that. But Creaky voice. I mean that could potentially sound like if you're talking to me, I don't really care. But if you say it to somebody else, like they might take offense to that. But creaky is a good um, say that that's sort of creaky sound. So that's a good word. Morning voice. I mean, in context, that would make sense. Um, I don't even know what we would call that. As I said, I would probably call it my lazy voice, I guess. Yeah. Um, like you're okay, so I see. So yeah, now that you explain that, your vocal fry, that makes sense. But I didn't know what you were referring to because I didn't realize I was talking that way. So there's something we don't want to talk about. As always, right? Yeah. Um, no, like I don't particularly care. I don't want to go too much into it because it's like not even a thing. But it's not like anything like oh my god something really bad happened. Um, it's just something that I potentially realized about myself that would explain pretty much all of the struggles in my life. um, but I don't have a formal diagnosis for it, and so I I feel kind of weird saying like, oh yeah, I think that there's this thing that I'm experiencing, if like I actually am not. So I don't know. But you are beautiful the way you are. I hope you realize that. I don't know about the beautiful part, but I am the way I am. We'll say that. I am that I am. Uh, yes, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. But see, this thing, um, I'll just go ahead and say it because I don't want to dance around it. It's like trying to not say it. There's a possibility that I have ADHD, which is very shocking to me because I didn't really know much about what that was. I always thought you had to be like a hyperactive, 5-year-old to have ADHD, but I stumbled upon something last night that was not even about that. It was about scheduling and stuff because I've always had trouble with like scheduling and organizing things. And I was looking for information on that, and then I stumbled upon this 3-part video series. And as this person, it's called How to ADHD, and as she's like having this interview with this guy who helps people with ADHD, he himself has ADHD, to like be productive and this and that, whatever. As they're like describing all these things, I'm like, what? Like this sounds like me. um, who doesn't have ADHD? I know, right? um, I know. I have green tea down in the fridge too. I just made some. And I thought about that too, because I was like, oh, I'm gonna have a live stream. I should go get my green tea. But it was like literally like I just got out of the shower and it was like 2:28 and I was like, I'm not even dressed. I don't have time to go get green tea. So um yeah, but anyway, so it is what it is. It would explain a lot based on what I've heard and everything, but it kind of like it hit me emotionally because I'm just like, oh my god, like this seriously explains so much of everything that I've struggled with in my life, and um, yeah, but we won't go into all that. I'll probably reveal certain little details here and there because I like to be motivational, to people like people who, especially if you have struggles like being consistent and focusing and stuff, which a lot of people do. Um, I like to give a push in the right direction if possible. But it's hard. That's one reason why you don't like. I try to upload a certain number of videos each week, but there's not like a particular time because I know if I set a particular time, like I'm gonna disappoint you and me. I'm not at that level yet where I can do that. I know myself that well, but I'm working on it. Hello, Mr. Kapoor. How are you? Thank you for joining the chat. I could say Mr. Kapoor is in the chat. Yes, it's already Friday. Well, for you. Don't speed up my time here. It's still Thursday. If it were Friday, I would be working. How long has it been? Probably a week. I don't know. Or you mean the live stream? I don't know. 20 minutes. Anyway, yeah, see, there was a thing. So I was talking about the ADHD thing because I clarified that because I was gonna say something else. And I don't remember what it was. Oh well, whatever. It's gone. I mean, in this live stream. Oh yeah, it's been 20 minutes and 42 seconds, and we have 5 viewers. 5 beautiful, beautiful people who are sitting here listening to me talk. Um, or even better, I mean, who knows? Maybe you're getting some light exercise in while you're listening to me talk. I mean that's beneficial for your brain and your body, right? Yeah, how is everyone? I asked them that too. People just don't talk. Some people talked, but not everybody. Remember my question. That sounds like just because like it came out of nowhere. It sounds like, hey, you remember my question? If you don't, I'm gonna hurt you. So it sounds like. Um, I remember that people have questions because I was asked like 3 major questions this week. um, and I have the comments pulled up here. Yeah, because it was about the was it the L thing? No, it was the and the Yeah, that was it. And I totally forgot about that. I was gonna prepare. That's okay. Um, I can prepare quickly because we talked about this before. Um, okay, yeah, we'll talk about that. And if anybody else is here who had a question from the comments, please mention it, and so I know you're here, and we will talk about that as well. Um, yes, I'm talking about things I don't want to talk about. Anyway, so Seaton asked in the comments recently of some video. I don't remember which video it was. Let's see. I think it was, yes. So it was in the comments of the last live stream. Not in the live chat, but in the posted video. So he says, I'm going to paste this here. Is that it? Yeah, I guess so. It just looks like so much more in the chat. Okay. Paste. Oh, I have a 200 character limit. That's stupid. Okay. Why is some native speakers pronounce light bulb like light bulb instead of bulb? Light bulb, light bulb, light bulb, light bulb. I do it both ways. Light bulb, light bulb. Could also be a Haischwa, L-colored Haischwa. That's actually a point I want to bring up. I'm going to be talking about it more in the extra practice for the Haischwa, or not the Haischwa. Yeah, I think it's in the extra practice for the Haischwa, but it's going to be in the extra practice for the the half L's vowel sounds, or the L-colored sounds, which is going to come in a while. I already have it planned out. I just don't know the exact time. So yeah, light bulb. To me, it's kind of weird to say it with a schwa. I don't know why. It feels a little forced. Maybe if I'm enunciating, but light bulb sounds fine. Light bulb, bulb with a high schwa sounds fine. But any of those are perfectly fine. So why? I don't know. That's basically the answer is I don't know. It's variation, as I always talk about. All right, so Seaton asked in the comments before, what do you say we discuss about the difference between monophthong, lowercase e, the first part of the diphthong, the diphthong, a, and the second vowel, e. So, funny thing, Seaton, this E sound, maybe I mentioned this before, I don't know, but this little E sound is actually in Spanish. It's, if I remember right, am I remembering the right vowel chart? I've seen so many different vowel charts. It should be in Spanish. Spanish vowel chart. Let me take a little detour here. And the question is really, though, not is if I already produced that sound in Spanish, or if I kind of just ended up doing the the third vowel sound. Um, and because these are little details that if you don't have the tools, like if you don't know the vowel chart, which I didn't look up the Spanish vowel chart until like a couple years ago, um, that you can easily be misled because the sounds are so similar. Even for my ears, it's hard to tell the difference. But okay, it doesn't matter. For some reason, I can't talk and look for that at the same time. So anyway, I'm pretty sure that's the symbol for the sound in Spanish. And the position is also, I think, slightly higher. Maybe anyway, it's around the same area. So if, for example, in Spanish, I know I'm talking about Spanish here, not English, but just bear with me. In Spanish, if I say se, this is I know, okay? And if I were to use more of an English sound, se, 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 it's kind of a little more open. It's kind of more, I don't know, more defined to me, I guess, or kind of brighter in a way. Where the Spanish one is like se, se, se. And maybe that's just the way I speak it. Maybe there's really no difference. And it just sounds Spanish to me. But when we're in English and we're talking about the first part of the diphthong, so remember, of course, the ending point for the diphthong a is the second vowel sound a. It doesn't sound like it, but it is. You can maybe say it goes up to halfway between the first vowel and the second vowel at the most. Maybe that's why it sounds a little bit different, but it's definitely not the first vowel. So if we try to isolate the monophthong, I don't want to say I don't see a point because I see how it can be useful, and we're definitely going to explore it. My initial assumption, like the reason I never talked about that before, is because it didn't seem like it would be a very useful point for most people. Maybe for you, based on your native language and based on certain issues you're having, it could be perfectly valid and that happens. So no problem. But the monophthong with this little e sound, the start of the diphthong a, it does not exist as a monophthong in English. Okay, it is not a monophthong not a monophthong sound in English. So that's why I see it as like I wouldn't think to talk about that because it's like it just doesn't exist as an individual sound. So why would you try to separate it out? Because the only problem I would see that you have if it's between this monophthong and the second vowel if you couldn't pronounce the difference between those, then you wouldn't be able to do the diphthong a. You would just say or something like that. Sort of like a weird extra combination position that doesn't really actually move between two sounds. And if that's what you're experiencing, well, I mean, then here we are. I'm actually going to recommend that you go ahead and if you want, I can give you some words here that if you want me to, but find some minimal pairs between a and record it, and send it to me on Patreon. That is a special case. See, I saw value in explaining the first part of I and ow because we have we have ah, and many languages, the a sound in many languages is somewhere between those two. Where in this case with that sound is so close to the third vowel sound. And many other languages, in my experience, based on what I've seen, they will either have the third vowel sound that English has, or they'll have this monophthong like Spanish does. and there's really such a small difference between them. Like even for my ears, like I don't really hear much of a difference between them. Like if I compare them side by side, if I listen to like a Spanish speaker, English speaker in isolation, I'll probably be able to hear a difference, no problem. But it's never anything that stood out to me. Um, and so you could like you really, if you wanted to, if you really, it might sound kind of weird sometimes, but if you do the third vowel plus the second vowel, and you just go between those two, like if you say I don't know, for the word day, if instead of going like a, where it's a little more tight, a little more closed, if you go all the way down to a, day, it sounds a little more open. It sounds a little bit weird, but it wouldn't be like horrible. um, and from there, you can even do sort of a ladder uh, stepping thing where you kind of go down to make sure you have a nice clear as an intermediary step, right? So you say, okay, I know if I'm at and I go to a, okay, and then try to just close that starting position a little bit, not all the way, but just a little bit, and that's going to sound more like the natural sound. So it's just like a slightly more closed version of basically. There might be a little more nuance into the exact tongue position and this and that. I probably talked about that in the A lesson. But that's the biggest point. So anyway, yes. And then if you want to help everybody else, this is up to you. After I listen to your recording on Patreon, we can maybe you can remind me about this next time if you can come to the next live stream, and then we can sort of I can maybe point out what the problem was so that other people can also learn from what you were dealing with there. Yes, ask away, Captain. Was there something else? That was about it. There's a light bulb question. Explain the tongue position of a diphthong. How does it glide? Okay. Let's see. A. So I'm always going off of, well, pretty much always going off of how it feels in my mouth. Luckily, that turns out to be really good because the way that I explain how it feels in my mouth is actually really useful to you guys. So this is how I do it. This is how it feels in my mouth. And again, I think I probably mentioned this in the A video, but maybe not. A, 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 A. So it kind of feels where the is kind of flat, right? The third vowel, and kind of just sits there, It's a little more open, it's a little more flat. The first part of A, to me, it feels kind of like things are mostly the same. The mouth is a little bit more closed, and it's like the front of my tongue is kind of starting to drop a little bit. So it's almost as if that's actually very similar to the E position, except more open. So if you drop E, eh, that would be the third vowel. So it's sort of right in between the second vowel and the third vowel. But if you keep that because for A, you don't have to have your tongue like that. For E, that's how my tongue feels. It has this little curve to it. You could do with that position, and it's perfectly possible. And if you keep that position through to this monophthong E sound, the monophthong start of the diphthong, that should actually produce the perfect sound. As long as you don't open too much and get it a little flatter, then you're going to go into the third vowel. So how it glides, you can actually just hold the same position going from the start of the monophthong to the end. A. And then as my mouth closes a little bit up to the part, the end of it, it feels almost like it might deepen a little bit. Like this kind of stays we're talking like what's millimeters. I'm American, so I don't use that, but we're talking about like millimeters, super small little change of like this stays a little bit farther down as it comes up a little bit. You might feel a little bit of change in the front part of your tongue there, but it's super micro, and unless you are already really good at feeling your tongue, you probably won't feel it at all. Um, Sorry for putting you out like this. Yeah, no problem. That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. Um, I just don't remember like every little detail of what I tell you guys in every lesson. Um, and so there's like things like this where I'm like, how did I explain that in the main lesson? And if I did, how did I explain it? um, but yeah, as long as I'm going off of what I feel, that's like going off of what I feel instead of trying to memorize some formal rules all the time, because then I'll never forget. I just have to go, how does my tongue feel? So, um, oh, we have 6 people now. Hello, 6th person. Feel free to say hi. Notice I said 6th person, 6th person. I got that th in there, 6th person. Um, can you also explain what the tongue positions of feels like in your mouth? Wait, the tongue positions? There's more than one? Technically, that's actually that could be a true statement. I think maybe that's a typo, or are we talking about modifications of the 4th vowel as well? Okay. um, yeah, so I feel like and second vowel are very, very close. Is more tight and slightly back. Eh, 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 eh. I wouldn't necessarily say more back. You could do that. A, a. Um, that's a different way to do it. I just did that right now, and I'm like, oh yeah, that works perfectly fine. That actually sounds clearer. So if you do it that way, it's fine. Again, remember, there's a range here. There's a range, especially between vowels. If you go from e to or e to or in between with the start of this monophthong here, um, there's going to be a range around the vowel that if you are in that range, of course, the exact tongue, shape could matter, the tenseness could matter depending on the sound. But as long as you're in that range, a native speaker is going to interpret it as that sound. If you get too close to the border between two sounds, then it's that's when you start to have communication problems, because we can't tell if you're saying, this vowel or that vowel, or it could be between front and back sometimes as well. And in the problem is, like, say in Spanish only has 5 vowel sounds, right? They have or sorry, not e, a, e, I see, I can't even do Spanish anymore. I'm thinking about English too much. E, a, o, u. Okay, 5 vowel sounds. Now, for a Spanish speaker, they have a bigger range around each sound, because if they go e to there's a point between them where it starts to become unclear, but there's such a big range in there that it doesn't really matter. Like, and I think last time I was talking about how I've heard Spanish speakers use what is in English the second vowel sound, and they don't notice it because it's not a Spanish sound. It's within sort of that range that in Spanish would probably be recognized as e. Because I usually hear it in places where they would say e instead of rather than e. And then if you're, say, a Spanish speaker, just to keep things simple, if you're a Spanish speaker, you're learning English, and now you have a sound in between the first vowel and what in English is the third vowel, your brain probably can't even hear that sound yet. And you have to learn how to hear that sound. You have to learn what to do with your tongue, how to exactly find it. And then now we're talking about the start of this monophthong, and that's an even smaller distance because it's super, super tiny. You're right. It's super, super, super tiny. You can look on the vowel chart and you say, okay, yeah, there's this distance here, but what does that feel like in your mouth? It's super tiny. So yeah, kind of same. It's kind of the same position, very subtle difference in tongue position. Our brain just does it without even knowing it. Exactly. So always be thinking about ranges, especially with vowels. There is no like perfect vowel position. Like there's no perfect e position, perfect a position. There's just things that sound like a solid e, solid a, solid a, whatever it is. And then there's things that start to kind of get away from that, and that just become less clear, and we can't identify them as the proper sound. So Um, yeah, so back to Davin's question. The tongue position of ah feels like. It kind of depends. Kind of depends. But if we're just going with like just the pure ah sound, um, that the way that I always describe it, ah, ah. Now, I feel I have to mention this because sometimes I forget to mention this. I'm so much more aware of like variation and different things and all that stuff now because I'm thinking about it so much more. Um, and we talked in a few live streams back how like oh sometimes like I just said back back back. I didn't say like back. I said like back. It's almost getting to the border with the eh there. It's still an ah sound. When we're speaking really quickly or maybe really lazily, um, especially with ah, which is supposed to be a very open sound, we don't tend to open quite as much. The tongue might kind of relax a little bit more, and that can happen. But the pure sound, if I were like in the lesson, the fourth vowel lesson, if I'm trying to give you the pure sound of what you should be able to pronounce, if you're clearly enunciating, if you just want to say that sound nice and clear, ah, 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 and you can kind of see maybe ah, uh-huh, uh-huh. So you can see there's sort of a difference in the shading. Ah. And what it feels like is right in here where it's dark. Ah, ah, uh-huh. That little part in there, if you can see that. It feels to me like my tongue is kind of coming like this. There's a very, very slight curve. It's not like this or anything. It's not like, that's too much. So it feels like a very slight curve. And then let's say the tip is like over here, right? So it feels like there's this little tiny dip, super small dip. In my mouth, it feels pretty huge, but obviously in your actual tongue, it's going to be really small. And there's this little tiny, tiny, tiny dip, and then the tip is kind of just there, sitting at the end, and the very tip of the tongue would just kind of sit, not down here, but this is your teeth here, kind of just sits somewhere in here. Um, ah, 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 ah. So it's almost like this part that's resting, and then there's the dip there, and then it kind of goes up and back. The back part of the tongue, which isn't discussed as much, but I realized from your guys' questions is actually very important. ah, 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 ah. That's so much harder because I haven't paid as much attention to that. Ah, 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 ah. You don't want it to be too far down. You don't want it to be too far up. That's actually a common problem that I find with English learners who really have a lot of trouble with the sound. Because some like yeah they need a little practice, but they'll kind of pick it up. Where other ones, it's like based on my guidance, the front of the tongue seems to be fine. It's like the sound is there, but there's something off about it, and that's usually when there's a problem with the back of the tongue. So you might be having the back of your tongue be like too far up, like you're kind of trying to push it up a bit, or maybe you're sort of just opening your the when you're opening your mouth, maybe you're letting the back of your tongue come down a little too much, and that creates too much space. If you're in either of those cases, it's just not going to sound like the same sound. So if I'm more closed, but the front is the same, ah, 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 it doesn't even sound like the same sound anymore, right? It's almost like it wants to come through my nose bit. If I do it too open, ah, ah. Now it's kind of like, okay, is that ah or is that going towards ah? Right? Obviously, it's not ah. It doesn't sound like a clear ah, but it doesn't really sound like ah anymore. Um, so the back of the tongue is important. It's just the sound is not made in the back of the tongue, and so it's not usually talked about. Um, but that's how it feels in my mouth. Um, to give you an exact position of the back, that's really hard to do because I mean, I don't know what your natural, and not necessarily you particularly, but whoever's learning English, I don't know like where you're naturally putting your tongue. Just know that it shouldn't be too closed. It shouldn't be too open. It should be just sort of nice and neutral. Um, but based on that description, you might think, oh, well, if I'm here, that feels pretty neutral to me. But then you say the sound and it's actually too open, or whatever it is. So, um, This is all part of the process. It's just another thing for you to play with, to try to get closer to the better, more perfect sound, or I guess within that range better. Okay. Two comments at the same time. Good job, guys. So if I get closer to the sound in pet in a sloppier, more relaxed conversation, it's fine. By the way, if you extend the vowel of man, is there some differences between the version of the vowel? Okay, yeah, so that's sort of like N after the A. Yeah, I was going to talk about that too. So for the first part of this question, if you get closer to, instead of saying pat with an A, pat, that's how it would be nice and quickly, or nice and clearly said. Hello, Elmi. I'm in the middle of some questions. I'm going to get to you in a second. So don't worry, but thank you for joining us. Good to see you here. Things. Yeah. So don't distract me, guys. See, this is another reason I think I might have ADHD, because like somebody else says something and I completely forget what I was doing, but it probably happens to everybody. Okay, so this is kind of a tricky answer, because if I just say yes, like I would have to verify how you sound. Because you might think like, oh, okay, well, I could just relax it a bit, but it's actually too much, and you don't realize that it's too much, and you're like on the border. Um, it's really a fine little line where it's like you're on the border and it's not clear which sound you're saying, and sort of being like just inside that border where it still sounds like an a, but it's not like a pure a. So I would definitely have to hear you to confirm that. If you want to send me a recording on Patreon, that's fine. Just to check how you're doing that. But technically, yes. If you get a little closer to pet, if you're not speaking in a super clear, enunciated way, if you're speaking quickly, it's not really a problem. Not really a problem. Yeah. But again, of course, keep in mind that if you give extra emphasis, right, the stress tends to open things more. And so just because the word is stress doesn't necessarily mean it has to be super open and clear, but it needs to be more open and clear than otherwise would be. So there's like two versions of all the vowels, right? There's the unstressed version and the stressed version. So if you say ah, nice and clear but not stressed, it's just ah. If you say it stressed, it's going to be ah, ah. It's the same sound, same position. It's just one is a little bit louder and louder, you know. And so if you have a context where maybe you're speaking pretty quickly, but you really need to emphasize the word with ah, and you try to do the lazy way towards eh, it might be a little confusing because it's like, okay, which one are you saying, right? So it's dynamic. English is a very dynamic language with pronunciation. This is what I'm learning more and more as I'm reflecting on it. If you extend the vowel of man, is there some difference between the perfect version of the vowel? Yes. Yes and no. The vowel sound itself is the same. The vowel sound, I'll say it again, the vowel sound itself is the same. It's still ah, okay? The problem is what happens when we're going towards the n, okay? Especially because there's a nasal sound. We're sort of getting ready for that nasal sound. And so we start with ah. It starts in the exact same position as if there weren't an N after it. And we get the same basic sound, but because we're preparing for that nasal, we might kind of start letting a little bit of the sound start to go through the nose. I can't even talk today. So instead of like man, right? It's man. It's kind of getting a little bit loose in the nose. Where if I say map, we don't hear any of that nasal. Okay. And then as you close your mouth towards the end, of course, that nasal is going to be fully enunciated when you hit the end. So man. So it's not that there's a difference in the vowel necessarily. The back of the tongue might be a little with my tongue. It's just that flap kind of gets a little loose that the nose a little bit. So the sound itself doesn't really change. It's just the quality of the sound. And if you speak Portuguese and you have nasal vowels, you'll probably notice that. there's a big difference. An English speaker won't really notice this, like unless you really point it out to them. Um, but there's a big difference between like if you say ah and ah, my mouth is the same position, but I'm letting it all go through my nose. Ah, 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 ah. It's kind of hard to do because we don't have nasal sounds like that. So, and Elmi says, makes sense. So it's about the tongue position. Well, there's tongue tenseness or relaxedness. There's a couple other factors, but yes, the tongue position is super, super important. And as we're seeing with the fourth vowel, the back of the tongue, depending, is a factor. It's not a back tongue sound; it's a front tongue sound. But obviously, if you're too open or too closed, it's going to distort the sound. And so the whole tongue is important. Your whole tongue position is very important. The most important part is, if it's a front sound, then it's going to be centered around the front, where the back maybe isn't as important as long as it's not too closed or too open to distort anything. That there's some wiggle room there. But yes. It says vowels are crazy. They're super close and yet so different. I know, right? Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Davin. That N sort of just changes the quality of what we're hearing as we start going towards that N. And I have observed people and very interested in watching accent comparison videos. Is it on your list too? If it's not, make sure you add it. I'm sure people would like hearing us. Yeah, so accent comparison, that's something that either I would probably do a collaboration with somebody and I don't even know anybody to collaborate with. Or B, I like accents myself, and I like playing with different English accents. But I'm a little too lazy to like try to master another English accent. So I don't feel like, if I try to compare like, oh, this is the British accent, this is the American accent, and I try to compare them, if I don't really like do my research, like extra work to make sure, okay, yeah, this is right in British English and be able to produce it that way, then I would be giving you guys some false information. And so it would be like a lot of extra work for me. I've thought about it and I might do it at some point, especially after the pronunciation course is finished. But who knows? Who knows? Yeah. But I love playing with accents, even if I don't do them, perfectly. But as you know, my Indian accent, or I guess Southern Indian accent, is pretty good. And then, what's the other one? I think I have a pretty good British accent, but there's some things that I know are a little off. Anyway, okay. I'm using an app called Elsa English to practice pronunciation. Did you already hear about it? It uses voice recognition. It uses another S there. It uses voice recognition. Oh yeah, spelling mistake here. Very good catch. Perfectly or perfectly? I guess this is a pronunciation question. I just said it the same way twice. I'll come back to that in a second. To address Elmi's question here, I had not heard about that. No. In this context, so just a quick little grammar correction here. You said, did you already hear about it? Americans really like to replace the present perfect and past perfect, especially past perfect, with the simple past. I don't know if you guys know that. I'm going to be talking about that in the future. I think I talked about that last time though. And here, if you use the simple past, it's okay. But I kind of feel more like I want to use the present perfect here. Like, have you already heard about it? But anyway, just a little grammar note there. So no, I haven't heard about it. I'll look it up and see. Which, by the way, I really want to create. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know when I'm going to do this. I don't know any of the details, but I have an idea. I want to create Um, a phonetic pronunciation dictionary. There wouldn't be any meanings. There's not where you go to look up dictionary meanings. It's a pronunciation dictionary based on the way that I'm teaching you guys. Because right, I tell you, oh, this sound, this sound, this sound, um, and then you guys keep asking me, how do you say this word? How do you say that word? How do you say this word? Well, if there were a dictionary where you could just go and look it up, right? Like you have the guide, you know what everything is supposed to be. You learned all the sounds through my course, and then now you have a reference that you can easily and quickly use, sort of like a replacement for the IPA. Um, but yeah, who knows if that'll ever happen. Okay, and I know Elmi also has a question from the comments to answer. I'm gonna have to bring that up. For sedent, perfectly or perfectly? Oh, I didn't even notice you left the T out. I didn't see that. So yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll answer this really quick. There's a nice little rule, and I think there are some exceptions to it, but it's a pretty consistent rule. When you have three consonant sounds, consonant sounds, not letters, because sometimes things are silent. It has to be consonant sounds, right? It's all about sounds. And when you have three consonant sounds in a row, the word, okay? Um, what usually happens, the full pronunciation, you'll say all of them perfectly, perfectly. That's the full, clear, enunciated version. But what usually happens in a case like this is the middle consonant sound will just disappear. Just disappears. There's a lot of words that do that. So, and hence your question, right? Because if you take out the T, well, we're left with the K and the L. And both of them are fine. Both of them are acceptable. The first one is technically correct, but the second one is probably more common. Because of this rule that we use, perfectly. If you say the T, it's fine. It's just we usually drop it. Say a sound plus N most of the time sounds like E or E. Yeah, I think that was your question, wasn't it? I was gonna go look that up, and can't remember what it was. And then I have another question from somebody else, but they haven't said that they're in the chat, so I don't know if they're here. If we have a lull where there's no questions, I'll bring up this person's question, because it'll probably help you guys too. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, you were asking about. So your original question was if you can pronounce the word bin, E-E-N, in American English with the first vowel sound. That's what he originally asked me in the comment. And what I said was, in American English, maybe there's some variation in American English, but definitely the way I say it is with the second vowel. There are some dialects that say it with the first vowel. You'd probably be mistaken as a Canadian because Canadians mostly sound the same as Americans. Many of them, not all of them, except there's some little shifts, like they say bean. So you would probably sound Canadian. But I also pointed out to him that there are other words that have this combination of I and N, because that's the problem here. He wants to say bean instead of bin because it's hard for him to say bin. But there's other words that have that same combination, and so we don't want to find some little shortcut like this because it doesn't help you with everything else. So, how do we fix this? Seen as in seen. And I know you have a question, David. I have not forgotten about you. Seen is said, seen, bin is said, bin. Yes. Remember that this is another reason why you guys don't want to completely trust spelling. Aside from the fact that English spelling is just really messed up. And there are many historical reasons for that. Some of the spellings that you will see that is part of like the official codified spelling of how we spell words, some of it is based on like the original British pronunciation. And I think that's the case here, where in British English, they say seen and been, right? And so it matches. Of course, there are exceptions where British people would say e where it's not spelled like that, or they'd say where it's it is spelled like that. Um, but that's why I would assume. And then in American English, Canadian English didn't really have that change. Maybe for some speakers, but I hear a lot of Canadians say bean also. And then in American English, that's one of the things that shifted. We started saying bin at some point instead of bean. Um, so if you want to sound American, you got to say it that way. That's just what it is. Pronounce bin exactly the same as the male name Ben. That's another possibility. We can come back to that as well. To answer Elmi's question here really quick. Okay. So let's talk very briefly about how to go from it to n. God, to my native speaking brain, it's like this is so simple, but I know it's hard for you guys. um, in so in. So if you say are you going from e? I know, right? If you go from e, so this is your top teeth here, right? Top of your mouth. And the E is very, very close, right? We're not touching anything. Vowels don't touch anything. Maybe the sides here, that's a different thing. But the vowel sound itself, the position doesn't touch. So very close, right? Your tongue might be a little bit slanted like this. Not too far forward, but not too far back. Okay, so we're around here. Now, if you go from there and you go to an N sound, een. What I do, I just pull my tongue straight up. Okay, it doesn't quite touch the teeth. It could touch the teeth a little bit, but I kind of just go straight up here. So it lands sort of just behind the teeth, so pretty much on that bump, which is around where the normal end position is. Okay. If you go is a little bit more open, a little bit farther down. The exact way that you try to do the the second vowel sound, will depend. Nah, trying to say two things at once. It will affect how you move into the N, right? Because as I was saying earlier, you can do the sound, the second vowel sound, with that same shape as the E, or it could be more relaxed. It could even be kind of up like this a little bit. I could do all of them in my mouth, and it doesn't really matter. It's a very flexible position. It's really about like, are you in that range with that shape? And we'll kind of hear it. So, if your tongue's already up like this, you say like eh. Obviously, you just have to kind of close it. In. What you might be doing is, as you're trying to close from it to n, you might be sort of passing through the e, and so you get this e sound. Like instead of saying bin, you say like bane. You're sort of letting the tongue just sort of go straight up through the e and then to the n. Don't do that. You want to go from the I and then lift the tongue like this. So you kind of want to keep it going straight up to where it's actually going to land a little bit behind where the N would land if it were E. Because if I go straight up from E, it's going to land here, a little farther forward. If I go straight up from I, it's going to land there, right? Because my mouth is a little bit more open. Technically, your mouth doesn't have to be a little bit more open. You can actually just shift the position of your tongue. But in that case, your tongue is going to be a little bit lower. And then as you come up, you want to make sure that you don't just go straight up through the E, but you actually you change the whole shape. Because if you're like this in the E position, it's not going to sound like an E. That doesn't sound like an E sound. Okay. But if you keep that shape up through as you're closing the N, it's going to sound like an E. That might be the problem you're having. If it is, then practice what I just told you. If it's not, you can go ahead and send me some recordings on Patreon. And I can maybe try to hear exactly what the problem is, give you some feedback, and then you can try to fix that. I can maybe open my mouth too much after the B sound, but that explanation about the I to the N really helps. Okay, cool. No problem. Yeah, apparently I have a gift for how to explain these things. I just get so many people saying like, wow, that's amazing. So yeah, good THX, good correction there. And I can see, I can maybe open my mouth too much. So we would probably say I might be opening my mouth too much after the B sound. Yeah, I might be opening my mouth too much. Um, yes, no problem. Okay, good. So we got that big question out of the way. Very nice. Glad I could help with that. Again, if you want to send me some recordings on Patreon, since you are a patron, go ahead and do that, or a recording with some words that have the in combination, and I can give you some more detailed feedback of exactly what's going on. But yeah, also with the lips, going any vowel from b, p, or going to any vowel sound, a common problem is that you open too much. So many English learners have that problem, and you have to keep it more controlled when you actually release those positions with the lips. Okay, going back up to what David asked earlier, it's a little bit behind now. Do you pronounce the L in all right? Good question, especially when you're starting a new sentence and you say the word at the start very quickly and almost as an afterthought. It almost sounds like I plus T. Ah, okay, I know what you're saying. Okay, so how it's supposed to be pronounced and how it is often pronounced by most people, the standard pronunciation, not like the full enunciated pronunciation, but just the standard pronunciation. All right. So it's an L colored fifth vowel, all. We say all. So a half L vowel, dark L. And then we go into the and you just go ah, o, It's just kind of all the way up. All right, all right, all right. And you go into I. Okay. Now, what you're describing, I, which we would informally write like this. This is more of a slang pronunciation. In the future, especially given the popularity of hip hop and whatnot, this might become more standard. But as of right now, in my experience, it is not standard. It will sound slang. It will sound informal. So, yeah, aight mate, exactly, right? Especially with those glottal stops in there, right? So if you want to use it, that's fine, but just know that it's very informal sounding. It's very, very informal sounding. So use it in the right context. And from Brazil, there's a sound very close to the I sound. Yes. In fact, if I remember the Portuguese vowel chart, the Brazilian Portuguese vowel chart, which you can look up on Wikipedia, I recommend you do that. Go to Wikipedia, type in like Brazilian vowel chart IPA or something like that, and you should be able to find a vowel chart like what I give you. And if I remember correctly, I believe you have the same exact symbol for the second vowel that we have, except it's in a slightly different position. And so it sounds slightly differently. Just like the E in Spanish is a little more forward, and so it sounds deeper. E instead of E, 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 which you probably don't even hear the difference between. I barely hear the difference between. It doesn't really matter. In fact, I've taught a number of Brazilian students, and in my experience, not all the time. I had one Brazilian student that this didn't work with, but if you use the Portuguese sound in places where we're supposed to use that second vowel in English, it should sound perfectly fine. Maybe slightly off, but it should sound almost like exactly the same as we would normally say it. If you want to add that to your recordings, go ahead. I can give you feedback, tell you if you're okay or not. And then you could just use the Brazilian sound. Same here, bro. I don't have the sound either, but very close to it. Which one is the closest? Okay, so yeah, you can answer that. But yeah, okay. So that answers your question, David, about all right versus ite. All right. There's sort of an intermediary between it, where ite is straight up slang, informal. It's like the most condensed form. Sometimes we have very condensed forms of things that don't sound so super slang and informal. They just they're kind of informal. But this is a case where it sounds super, super informal. But there's an intermediary as we go from like the standard clear pronunciation, all right, to that ite, right? and you can sort of be in between, and it will sound okay. It doesn't sound super, super informal. It just sounds like lazy, right? And that would be if you do, all right, all right, all right. Instead of doing all, where we have that full L colored ah, you kind of do like sort of a lazy ah, where it's maybe a little more closed. Ah, 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 ah. And then you just go into the All right. All right. All right. So if you do that, it's a little easier, a little bit faster. You don't have to worry about the L color. And that's acceptable in this particular combination. So there we go. Okay, am I behind on anything? Oh, yes, David also said that you have heard some native speakers pronounce bin exactly like the same as the that. I can't read today either. Exactly the same as the male name Ben. Yeah, like have you been? Have you been? Have you been? Um, that's a very common place where it might be used. Of course, you can say have you been? That's how it's supposed to be. There's no problem with that. And see, if I try to use that in other places, I've been to Mexico. I've been to Mexico. I've been to Mexico. Yeah, that sounds like it's sort of a just a standard variation. Maybe you can't use it all the time, and maybe it's just something that some speakers do, but it sounds okay to me. I don't think I would probably ever use it unless maybe I'm speaking lazily, right? We talked how like the ah, if you get kind of lazy, it might get a little closer to eh. Well, if we're going eh and we're getting just a little lazy, instead of going tighter, we might get looser, right? We might go a little bit more towards that eh sound because that's sort of like the middle neutral position. Um, and so that might be why at least some speakers do that. I haven't noticed if I do that, but if you notice it, then you can point it out. But definitely in American English, bin is the standard that you're supposed to say. And Ben, I don't. It doesn't sound informal or anything. It just sounds like a variation. There's not a problem with that. Okay. Um, between the and e, yeah, very difficult to explain as a correct vowel. But when Brazilians speak, no s there, because Brazilians, plural, they speak. That modifies that. Wait. Oh, they. Yeah, they modify just a y. The sound of eh, and it becomes an eh. I think that's what you were saying. Yes, that sounds about right. We have the eh that becomes eh when we speak fast. Ah, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. That's clearer. Yeah, no, no problem, no problem. Like that's always the thing. Like I don't. I mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. I don't want you guys to be afraid to ask questions or type in the chat. Um, Sometimes you'll say something that's kind of funny, and that's fine. Like I'm never gonna laugh at you. um, I might laugh with you. You're like, oh, that sounds kind of funny, but that's why we're here, right? It's like it's expected that you're going to make some mistakes because you're here to learn English, right? So definitely no need to worry about perfection. It's like, oh, what are people going to think if I misspell this or if I use the wrong grammar? It's like, who cares? If I don't understand you, then it's actually good practice because you say, okay, I tried that, that didn't work. Let me reformulate. And now you're actively engaging the language. You're saying, okay, how can I change this that would make more sense in English? So it's perfect practice. So making the mistake is actually good for you, right? Exactly. It's more fun with mistakes. Now, I get the anxiety because, when I speak Spanish or I try to speak some other language, I don't want to make mistakes. I don't think anybody wants to make mistakes. But I know that they're important and that you can't avoid them. And so you might as well just try to communicate, learn from, bigger mistakes first. And then as over time, you can focus more on the details. Don't try to fix everything at once, but it's just how it is. So, yes. And in fact, in any skill, it could be guitar, programming, whatever, or art, right? If you're drawing or painting, even um, the the learners, whether in classes or just self-taught, the learners who spend the extra time, focusing and making the mistakes and then noticing their mistakes and doing lots of iterations and different variations of stuff, those are the students that get the farthest, the fastest. And even if it's not particularly fast, they definitely go way farther than the average learner who, just puts in some time here, some time there. So yeah, you weren't born knowing how to walk, right? So you had to figure that out. It's the same thing. Um, for the word gulf, yes, good question. Good question. I was going to address that too. Okay, so first for David's question, since you um, wrote your question first. So this word gulf, I think it might have been in the document you sent me of the words for the vowel sounds, like example words, which I still have and I'm still using, by the way. So thank you very much. By the way, if you want to think of some consonant words, like just extra consonant sound words, because I haven't done the extra practice for the consonants yet. If you want to do that, if you have any questions, you can send me another document. I'm totally cool with that because it helps me. I don't have to think as much or search as much. But I think it was in your list. One of the words was golf, and I think it was under the schwa sound or something. And as I was looking through these words, I realized something, that the general American. So glad. Yes, I do. Thank you very much. The general American pronunciation, I believe, is supposed to be an L colored schwa, right? So we do the schwa but then we L color ol. So ol, gulf, 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 and that sounds okay to me. It doesn't sound wrong. It sounds like the way somebody else would say it, not the way I would say it. But it sounds perfectly natural to me. Um, Maybe if I were really enunciating like the Gulf of Mexico, I might kind of go into that schwa sound. But what I usually do here, this is actually sort of a little detour from your actual question. I notice that I tend to use the L colored high schwa. And there's a series of words like this. There's like gulf, and we talked a bit about how like okay, mull should be. I think it was mull. Mull should be a schwa, not a high schwa. And I actually kind of thought about it more, and I realized that pretty much anytime you see ul or ull, um, doing a schwa or a high schwa doesn't particularly matter. There are some words where it has to be a high schwa, like pull. It's not pull. Okay, that would be wrong. But for other words where it's like it's supposed to be a schwa in General American, I noticed that if I were to do it with a high schwa, I don't see any problem with it. Like it doesn't sound wrong. Um, so the safe thing to do is anytime you see ul, of course, spelling, it could just be spelling, who knows? But usually when you see ul or ull, if you do a L colored high schwa, that should cover every case, um, including the ones where you have to use the high schwa. And that would be the safer, easier thing to remember to do. But if you're already used to doing the L colored schwa in words like that, as long as you don't do that in the ones where it's supposed to be a high schwa, like pull or bull or whatever, then you're okay. It doesn't really matter. As for your question itself, with more of an O sound, the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf. Yeah, I can imagine people saying that. That's sort of like a lazy way. The Gulf of Mexico. Well, actually, no. What am I saying? Gulf. Yeah, with an O sound. Because now I'm looking at the word golf, which is actually golf, golf, golf. That's so GOLF is actually fifth vowel. It's not O. Golf, golf, golf. But if you say golf as golf with an O sound, that actually sounds okay. That's the lazy variation. Definitely not standard, but it's a lazy variation. So point here, either schwa or high schwa, you're good with the word golf. So Do you think it's good to practice the vowel sounds in a phrase? Yes, actually. Um, so with the pronunciation course, um, right now I'm really just focusing on like kind of cranking out the sound lessons. There are going to be you probably noticed like at the beginning of the course I kind of had a little bit more mixed where it was like okay some sounds and then some intonation and then some whatever. Um, and I found it a lot easier. I'm just gonna like finish all of the sounds. And then if there's anything like about intonation or stress or whatever that I think would fit good in a spot between some of the sounds, for like the whole course feel, I'm going to go back and add those later, when I finish the sounds. Of course, I'm going to have a separate playlist that is just the sounds. So if you just want to watch videos about the sounds and not worry about stress or whatever, then you can do that as well. Um, but I mentioned that because, yes, there's a cat. That's one of the cats. That's the cat that's not usually in here. Uh, I mentioned that because there's a technique, and I'll be making videos about more about techniques for pronunciation as well in the future. And there's things that I've even tried on students that I hadn't necessarily heard about people making that I kind of developed based off my own intuition working with students. Um, and your ultimate goal is the basic sounds, you know the basics of stress, and you can actually like hear the stress. That's sort of the key there is you hear it, and then you can adapt your pronunciation to it. So you learn a little bit about stress and how that works. And then, of course, there's like the overall rhythm and stuff. It's a little more abstract. Um, and then there's the connection rules, and that's a lot to learn. I'm not saying you necessarily have to learn all of that before you use some of these techniques, but in the way that I'm making the course, I'm trying to do one thing at a time here. Um, but ideally what you want to do is once you start getting some of those pieces, like how I usually teach it is once you're done with the vowels, like you can actually pronounce the vowels well enough, you know well enough most of the time. There's some vowels that might take you a little bit longer and you can keep practicing those on the side. That's fine, but vowels usually cause most of the problem for basic sounds. So once you finish the vowels, you can start using some other techniques, such as what I call slow shadowing. Slow shadowing is an extremely, extremely powerful technique because shadowing by itself is already powerful, right? You listen to somebody saying, "Who's that man over there?" and you try to repeat it, right? And you ideally try to speak on top of them while recording yourself and then play back both so you can actually hear the difference between the two and make further improvements. You don't have to record yourself, that's optional. It's a useful tool. But slow shadowing allows you to really slow down, really hear everything and notice every detail and try to make sure that your tongue is following the exact path that it needs to follow. Of course, it's never going to be a perfect 100% path. I could say the same sentence 3 times and my tongue is roughly going to hit all the same places, but it's not going to be, like a machine. So it doesn't have to be that perfect. But like when we say, "Who's that man?" Okay, who's that? Who's that man? The Z kind of takes over the TH in that case. And in a slow shadowing, in a slow recording where you hear instead of "Who's that man," your brain might say, "Okay, I know it's supposed to be who's that," and you don't even hear that the TH isn't there. But in the slow recording, you hear "Who's that man?" Oh, there's no TH there. And you can try to replicate that going from the "oo," well, from the H, "who," it's like an H-oo sound, "who," to the, yeah, to the Z, right? So you try to feel that in your mouth. Who's, and then you go to "ah," "who's that? Who's that?" Right? And you're really focusing and pay attention to detail and trying to make little tiny changes to get it better. If you do that on, say, 20, 30, 40 sentences, your pronunciation is going to be fantastic. Maybe not perfect, but it's going to be fantastic. Um, that's the type of exercise that you have to do if you really want to go deep and master the flow. Um, And that will eventually start transferring into your actual speech because you're going to get so used to actually hitting these. You do have to speed it back up, and that's part of the technique for slow shadowing. Is after you shadow it slowly and you get it all down, you start trying to speed it up a little bit until you start breaking. You can't quite hit that combination anymore, and then you isolate that, practice that combination a bit more, and then go back into the full speed. Once you're able to do that speed, you try to speed it up even more. And once you can say, like at the speed I'm speaking, who's that man over there? Who's that man over there? And it comes out almost exactly the same every time, like a native. Um, yes, you've mastered that one sentence, and you might think, well, that doesn't seem very useful for one sentence. But if you do a number of sentences using this technique, it's going to start filtering into your speech. And that is how you go from having not so great pronunciation to automatically using the proper pronunciation, because you don't improve your pronunciation while speaking. You will be able to notice some things. You will be able to make some adjustments. There is some benefit. But when you're speaking, just like you can't sit there thinking about grammar all the time, you have to focus on communicating. Um, and so for the most part, you can't think about grammar. You can't think about pronunciation. You have to think about communicating. Pronunciation, grammar is improved through speaking largely. But in a different way without like super focusing on it, where pronunciation is largely improved outside of conversation. Um, so, okay, anyway. uh, so, do I think that it's good to practice the vowel sounds in phrases? I know that was a really long answer, but yes, basically yes. And there's many ways that you can do that. That was just one example off the top of my head that is particularly powerful. Okay, Sedent says the $1,000,000 question. It's an expensive question. Yeah, that is a standard phrase. I'm trying to be funny. Do you think Native Americans would be able to identify? You say Native American because you're the Native American there, probably. Would be able to identify and pronounce vowel sounds individually, like the way we non-native people try to do. Would be able to identify and pronounce vowel sounds. Do you mean like a Native American who doesn't speak English, like they're learning English as a second language? Or you mean like they're a native speaker and they can kind of do what I do, where they can isolate and identify sounds? Oh, the cat attends classes too. Yeah. Apparently, I don't know why she's in here. She's never in here. She's like freaking out about something. She's the cat that doesn't care about me. She never pays attention to me. Um, Ghosts, probably. That's a whole other topic. We can talk about that. um, so yeah, Seaton. So since you said no, I assume you mean like they're native speakers. Which okay, hold on. I have to clarify something just to be sure for because you said Native Americans, and in English when we say Native Americans, we mean not people who are American natives. Wait, hold on. Yeah. Oh, see, this gets so confusing. Native American refers to the group of people who were here before Christopher Columbus came. um, and I assume that's what you're asking, um, unless you mean American natives, which would be like me, because I'm not Native American. But I'm an American native. Native speakers. Okay, yes. So that'd be American natives, which includes Native Americans if they're native speakers, right? Okay. Okay. Do you think that native English speakers, who are Americans, we'll say, would be able to identify and pronounce vowel sounds individually? Yes, absolutely, 100%, absolutely. Um, I mean, I can ask you the same question. Like, I mean, everybody's a little bit different, of course. Like these are things your native language. You don't usually sit and think about the sounds of your language. You just speak, right? And then maybe if you're having a weird day or you smoke some pot or something, you say like, dude, like why do we say it that way? Like, then you become aware of things like that. Usually you don't, but I think most people in any language, like if they just thought about it for a second, like I don't know, in Spanish, right? If I say, uh, quiero que me hables inglés, right? I want you to speak English to me, or with me. Uh, they just say that. They're not necessarily aware, but if they actually focus on it, and I say, "Oh, what's the sound at the start of hables? What's the sound at the start of hables?" And they might think about it and be like, "Ah," spelled with an H, but the H is silent in Spanish. So they say, "Ah," right? And they say, "Well, what that blah, blah, what that BL combination?" Right? And they start thinking about it. Hables, hables. There's a B, there's an L, and in fact, I have one Spanish student from Spain that he realized that there's actually two types of D's in Spanish, at least in Spain Spanish. Um, and that was really interesting to me because based on my ears and based on how I learned Spanish, there's just the one D, which is a dental D. But he said that there are some, depending on where the D is in the word, they can actually do more of like a farther back D that's a little closer to English. So but he was never aware of that. Like if I would have asked him, it's like, how do you make a D sound? He would just say the, it's like there's just the one D. But in actuality, you know, it's just putting your conscious attention on it. That's all it is. That's all it is. I don't think about the sounds of my language before learning English pronunciation. I never have been so. I know exactly, right? I became so much aware. Most of the things I know about English grammar and English pronunciation didn't come from like professional schooling. It came from teaching myself Spanish. And I mean, I dabbled in this and that and whatever before that, but really teaching myself Spanish and trying to go deep into it, especially the pronunciation, I learned so much about English. Um, and that's what it does. You have to sort of become aware well, you don't have to, but generally you tend to become really aware of a lot of that stuff. Okay, so backing up a little bit, Elmi, do you plan to do videos about consonant clusters? Yes, yes, I do. That is, I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to place that, but in my mind, my initial reaction is to place that after the individual sounds because now we're talking about sound combinations. And that starts to get into a little bit between like linking and stuff, even though it's not necessarily connections in the way that I look at them. But we're starting to include, more than just one sound. So I am going to be doing that, especially difficult combinations. I probably won't cover every possible combination that exists. But if there's any particular combinations that you guys have difficulty with, definitely let me know. Right? You don't have to do it now. In fact, I recommend that you don't do it now because this chat is actually just going to be probably in the replay and not in the actual comments, and I'll forget about it. But on some video somewhere eventually, or you can send me a list on, Patreon or email or whatever it is, and be like, these are the consonant clusters that I have trouble with and that I want you to talk about, and I will make sure that I schedule that in to my overall lessons, and we'll get there after I finish the basic sounds because we got to get that first. So, do you say la as in La La Land and la the same? Yes. La, 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 la. LAW in General American is law, where they have that loop around. It's sort of that backward C sound, I believe. I think that's what it's supposed to be. The way I say it, Western American, these are pronounced the same. Ah, 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 ah. It's just the fifth vowel. So yeah, basically the W, at least in Western American, the W is just spelling, um, and which is easier, right? Okay. So Elmi says I have something, or I have to say something. Here in Brazil, people often say my name wrong, and you say it's okay. That's hilarious. Hmm. I'm not even sure how they would try to say it in Portuguese, but yeah, okay. Um, cool. Glad that I'm saying it correctly. That's definitely how we would say it in English. I'm just saying it naturally. I'm not trying to say it a special way. So, and we say it's so funny. Yes, the difference between fun and funny. Really quick. Fun is well, fun is a noun, right? So if we say something was fun, it's like you had a good time. There might be laughter, but not necessarily, right? Usually games are fun. You may not laugh while you play a game, but they're fun, right? They're interesting. In Spanish and I think in Portuguese it's something like divertido or divertido or something. I don't remember. I don't know enough about Portuguese to know exactly how that would be pronounced. But yes, funny is an adjective, which means ha ha ha, right? It makes you laugh. Very common mistake. So you can sort those two out. What's the difference between accent and pronunciation? Yeah, that's a good question. There is a technical difference. There's pronunciation, accent, and dialect. Um, and if I remember correctly, so pronunciation just refers to like in general, like how are things pronounced, right? Um, when we're talking about what was the difference between accent and dialect? Because dialect and accent are usually used interchangeably, even though they're technically not the same thing. And I forget exactly what the difference between them is. So I kind of use them interchangeably because they're commonly used interchangeably, and some people probably think that's bad and whatever. But it really, unless you're a linguist, the difference doesn't particularly matter. Um, but between accent or dialect and pronunciation, again, pronunciation is just the general thing. So if we're talking about English pronunciation, that technically includes British English, American English, Australian English, Indian English, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anything that would be sort of a native pronunciation, although I guess you could include, Spanish English, German English, whatever, from non-natives, because then there would be like a German pronunciation. But then we say like he has a German accent, right? So he has an accent in his English pronunciation. So the pronunciation doesn't match what would match, a native pronunciation, whatever that native pronunciation might be. The dialect is supposed to be more. Um, oh yeah, that's what it is. If I remember right, accent is the sound, and dialect includes the accent, but it also includes like regional words and things like that. Um, so in terms of pronunciation, accent and dialect there's not really any difference between them. I should probably look this up because I looked that up before and I was just like, yeah, that doesn't really matter. um, oh, there's so many definitions for accent. Why? There's like 9 definitions for accent. An effort in speech to stress one syllable over adjacent syllables. That's such dictionary speak. Um, the stress thus given a syllable. God, I hate the dictionary. Um, a distinctive manner of expression. Uh, distinctive of distinctive or characteristic inflection, tone, or choice of words. Yeah, see, there's so many rhythmically significant stress on the syllables. Blah 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 blah. Oh yeah, okay. So, dialect linguistics, a regional variety of language distinguished by features of vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation from other regional varieties and constituting together with them a single language. Okay, so accent deals primarily with sounds, as I was saying, the pronunciation itself, where dialect includes other things like grammar, vocabulary. Some idioms are even regional. Like I've had students ask me, like, "What does this idiom mean?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I have never heard of it, but it's an idiom." um, so yeah, dialect is just like regional variety. If you have like a pie, like the pie of English, there's like this slice and that slice, those would be the dialects. Because they all together make what we would consider English. Because at least as far as English goes, all native accents, for the most part, are mutually intelligible, which is just a fancy word meaning that if I listen to any native speaker speaking any dialect of English, I will be able to understand them, at least 99% of what they say. Scottish English is a little bit of an exception there because they can be, at least for me, difficult to understand. Um, okay, we're getting a little behind here. So basically, I wouldn't worry about the difference between accent and pronunciation. If you want to get technical and you like linguistics, go for it. But it's not practically useful to actually help your English. It doesn't. It doesn't matter. Okay, why do people in older American movies speak in this weird accent that no one uses anymore? Marlon Brando and James Dean sound normal. And older Americans speak in this weird accent that no one uses anymore, like in Casablanca. Guess what? Haven't seen Casablanca either. And you can't tell me you're shocked because, I mean, this is just normal, right? um, so I can kind of answer that question. The movie sort of preserved the time, and it says it's held for review. This is what she wrote, or he wrote. I'm actually not sure because I see a profile picture. It looks like a female, but then David seems like a male name to me. At least could be wrong. Um, I always hate having this type of question because I don't want anybody to be offended. But this is the comment. YouTube asked if I wanted to show that. This is a common thing. There's a lot of movies I haven't seen that, like, probably all of you guys have seen, like Taxi Driver. I haven't seen Taxi Driver. Nope, never watched it. But so in movies, like the older movies, I think number one, so there, if you go back in America, say 50 to 100 years, there was a bit of difference in the pronunciation. Of course, I mean, there's still regional variation in this and that, whatever. But what was considered standard, I think, was a little bit different. Like, for example, the voiceless W, the wh sound instead of w. That is something. Again, there are still some speakers who use that, especially if they're highly educated. But I mostly hear that coming from like older people, you know, like 50 plus, 60 plus. Like my grandpa speaks that way. Um, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but I think, you know, you go back 50 years or so, and that was kind of like the standard. Where now, I don't think it's so standard. And maybe that's just me because I never noticed it before. Um, but that seems to be something that's shifted because I mean I don't use it, and most people I speak to don't use it. So that's one thing, right? Time kind of shifts things a little bit. It could also be that back in like the earlier movies, you know, before we had color and all this stuff, there was still maybe a bit more of this like classical drama effect to it, like theater performance, where you know maybe they held themselves a certain way, they you know enunciated a certain way that you might do in a theater. You know, I don't know. I don't know. But I think also since you mentioned Casablanca, I haven't seen it, but I've seen like clips from it, and I, you know, whatever. I think that's more regional variation or something. I don't know. I don't know. Time, region, probably a combination of the two. um, okay, tips about the process to learn grammar, or just how to learn it. Okay. English grammar, of course. Well, I mean, I technically apply to all grammar, but I already know Portuguese grammar. Well, good. That's a good place to start. So now you can compare your Portuguese grammar to English grammar. Which, by the way, is not always a bad idea. It's one of the most useful tools that we have, whether it's pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, doesn't matter, or even a completely different skill like in music. One of the most powerful tools we have is to um, relate things to things we always know. We already know. So you build off of that knowledge, even if it's just like a temporary scaffold to kind of remember it. So mnemonics are really good for that because you can base the mnemonic off of other things that you already know. Uh, so your native grammar can actually be extremely useful if you actually know it. A lot of people don't actually know it. I drink this before it goes flat. Okay, so tips about the process to learn English grammar, how to learn grammar. Well, I wrote a whole book about how to learn a language, and there are a lot of techniques in there. I have a whole chapter on grammar. In fact, let me pull that down here. Um, that's it. If I can reach it. Strange noises. Okay. Here we are. I need to go to bed. I enjoyed the live stream very much. Thank you for all your insightful answers, but you really should watch all the classics. Take it easy on Dr. Pepper. Indeed. Indeed. And stop smoking. Smoking's bad. But yeah, no problem. Thank you for stopping by. Glad I could help. Have a good rest, a good sleep, and probably see you next week, I hope. But yeah. So that's a bookmark. Grammar. I'm not just gonna like read this to you or anything like that. And actually, I since you signed up for Patreon and you're one of my first 10 patrons, I believe I sent you a link to all my books. Bye. So you actually have this book, right? The How to Learn a Language book. If you have any problems with that, you can let me know. Me too. Time to go to bed. Okay. Bye, Sedent. Thank you very much for stopping by. Everybody's gonna leave now. But yes, I very much appreciate seeing you here, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Don't forget to send me those recordings. Okay. So grammar. The chapter on grammar is one of the last chapters because it's for a reason. It's one of the least important chapters, relatively speaking. But I talk about grammar, a breakdown of essential grammar terms. Essential grammar terms are useful to know. And then there's the tools and resources, techniques, and activities. So whenever we're talking about how to learn something or a process for learning something even, there's always the two parts. There's the tools and resources that you would use. So like a vowel chart is a tool or a resource. Sometimes there's not much difference between tool or resource, but and you don't have to use a particular tool, but some tools are extremely useful, like a vowel chart. I'm trying to get to the grammar chapter here, 281. There we go. So the tools and resources are things that you may or may not use, and then there's going to be techniques and activities that might use some of the tools, might not use some of the tools. And so that's the first place to start is you can identify certain tools that you can use. And again, in the grammar chapter, I talk about how I look at grammar. I talk about breaking things into simpler pieces, and I use Spanish as an example since that's my strongest language, strongest foreign language. And this book, by the way, is actually directed at native English speakers. So if you're going through this book, I wrote this in a style that is very relaxed and very natural. I'm just speaking to other English learners or other English speakers. And if you can read this book and you can understand it pretty well, that's a really good sign. But that aside, priority is important. Okay. That's the first thing, right? You have to have all these pieces in place. Well, you don't have to, but it helps a lot if you have all these pieces in place, right? And priority, right? I talk about here. What did I talk about with priority? Yeah, your level, your goals, right? The number one thing, whether you're speaking grammar, vocabulary, whatever, the number one thing is always going to be like, what's your goals, what's your needs, what's your interests, right? And yes, I did just make a native grammar mistake. I don't know if you caught it, but we'll move on. right? Because if, you know, let's see here. Vocabulary is usually a good example here because, you know, you don't need to know the word, what's that really long word that people always use an example of? Anti-disestablishmentarianism. You don't have to know what that means because you're probably never going to use that word. Now, if you're interested in yeah, I know, right? Anti-disestablishmentarianism. That's a crazy combination word. Anti-disestablishmentarianism. I can't spell. I mean, that's not right. Yeah, this is where words get so long that natives actually were just like, how do you spell that? I don't know. Um, yeah, that's right. Oh, that's why. Dis, no. Okay, whatever. That might be slightly spelled wrong. It looks the same. I don't know. Maybe the chat just doesn't recognize it. Anti-disestablishmentarianism. Yeah. But the point here is that that is a really, I know. Uh, don't learn German though, because German words can be even longer. That's a crazy word that us natives tend to kind of pick up on in high school because it's just like this long, fancy word that refers to something very specific in like, well, it could be technically philosophies, politics, whatever. And if you're not interested in the type of thing or the topic that would use that word, you don't have to know that word, right? There are so many English words. Some people estimate that there are over 1 million English words. There are at least 500,000. Some of them are very old and we don't particularly use them, but we have so many words, and you really don't need to know all those words. Um, so, with grammar, um, you know, what do you need to communicate? Ideally, if you say, okay, well, I want to be able to speak like a native speaker and just use the language and this and that, whatever, that's your ultimate big goal. But that doesn't tell you anything. That tells you your big fancy endpoint somewhere in the future. You don't know how you're going to get there. You don't know what you need to get there. You don't know the steps, right? And you don't know what that looks like. Okay, so it's good to have that as a final goal. If that's like, oh, that's my dream, that's what I want. Fine. Some people don't even have that. They just like, I want to communicate well enough. Even if I make mistakes, fine, whatever. Just as long as it's clear and understandable and whatever, then that's fine. So if that's your goal, then that's also cool. I'm starting to read Stephen King books to get used to novels. Love to read. Yeah. Well, yeah. If you like the genre that Stephen King usually writes in, then that's definitely fantastic. Absolutely, especially because you have a lot to read. Even just in one book, you have a lot to read. Um, but yeah, definitely, that's fantastic. Which, by the way, if you are going to read, you might want to look into something like, well, I guess you can't do this if you have the physical book. See, yeah, this is where it becomes a problem. There's a site called Link. Um, I think I do have an affiliate link to in the description of this video. You don't have to use it. That is a really, really good interface for reading. Unfortunately, you can't just like you would need the digital version of the book, obviously, not the physical version. But then you can't just like copy and paste into Link because Link is a proprietary service, and you do have to pay for it and stuff. So it doesn't really work, unfortunately. But there's learning with texts. Learning with texts, which I mentioned before, also very, very similar to link.com. You do have to set up a local server, which sounds scary and fancy. It's really not. He walks you through all the detailed instructions of how to do that. But if you go to learning with text and you set all that up, you'll get the same basic interface of Link. And how it works is you click on a word and it'll bring up one or possibly two dictionaries, depending on how you set up your settings. And you just automatically have those references. You can even have it, instead of bringing up a dictionary in a dictionary, you can have it bring up like a dictionary and Google Translate. You can have it bring up a dictionary and like a website that gives you example sentences for that word, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's super, super useful. And then you can also, when you click on a word, you can choose how well you know it. If it's a well-known word, then the highlight goes away because all words are highlighted. And if you kind of know it okay, you can put it like a 3 or something. Or if you really don't know it at all and you want to review it again later, you can put it as like, don't know very well. And anyway, it's a really good reading interface that I used for quite a while when I was learning Spanish. And if you have the text version of the book, I don't think Kindle will work because they have the copyright protection on it and you can't extract it. But if you have like the EPUB version of a book or something, you can just like copy the text and put it into learning with texts. And then now you can read the whole book using that software. Some similarity with the Kindle option to learn a new language. Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that. I need to explore more about that, but I've heard Kindle is kind of moving in that direction too, which would be absolutely fantastic. Might not necessarily be as good as Link or Learning with Text, but who knows? I mean, it would work really well for Kindle for ebooks. So, um, yeah, that's probably just a performance thing. It'll be fixed later if it's a little too slow. But yeah. Anyway, there's technology that you can use. I lost my page. All right. So yeah, you have your priority, which is based on your goals and stuff. Once you know where you're going to go, then you can start breaking things down, right? If you don't know where you're going to go, you can't break it down, right? Because if you're going to go to the beach, you need to take the steps to go to the beach, like literal physical steps, right? One step, one step, one step. You eventually get to the beach. But if you don't know where you want to go, it's like, well, I'm just going to walk. Okay, you might end up, in some other country or whatever. Who knows? So you have to know where you're going, and then you can break it down into the steps that you need to take. And you need to determine, what's important to you. If your ultimate end goal is to sound exactly like a native, have like perfect grammar, also be able to break the grammar perfectly. That's a whole other more advanced thing. Um, Again, this is a good goal to have, but you need to get a little more specific. You need to get a little closer to where you are and figure out, right now, how do I start moving towards that? So that's the first step. Make lots of mistakes, of course. I have a thing in here called phrases over rules. So there's nothing wrong with learning grammar rules. But in general, you don't really want to focus on memorizing grammar rules because grammar rules are knowledge, and that knowledge can be very useful. But number one, you don't actually have to have that knowledge to learn how to speak the language. It makes it a lot easier if you learn the right grammar at the right time. So, oh, okay, I understand. But and some grammar is definitely worth studying, right? Like if you're a beginner and you study the present tense, I mean, if you don't study the present tense, what are you doing? So there's big grammar points that you probably should be studying. As you get more advanced, there's sort of like smaller grammar points that are still like medium size that are really worth kind of learning. Not trying to like master or memorize them necessarily, but actually trying to use them. But and so the 80-20 rule, I don't know if you know about that, the 80-20 rule. We don't have to care exactly. I'm still on my Spanish keyboard. We don't have to care exactly where that came from or whatever, but basically, it's in general, you will get 80% of the benefit from 20% of the material. So there's about 20% of English grammar that will give you 80% of the ability to successfully speak English. And that usually includes things like tenses, maybe a little more advanced conditionals, things like that. So identifying those things can also be extremely useful. And in the future, I don't know when, but I am going to be talking about things like this on my channel. Like how do you identify the next most important grammar for you to learn and things like that. But aside from rules, instead of focusing so much on rules, you really want to focus a bit more on phrases because, and this is also true for vocabulary, instead of focusing on individual words, which is okay, you generally want to be focusing more on phrases and chunks, set phrases, or even if they're not set phrases, like I want to go to the beach, that's not a set phrase, it's just an expression. I want to go to the beach. Okay. Um, you have so much in there, right? Including the pronunciation if it's coming from a native source. But I wanna, so want to go to. Okay, so we have two twos, right? As an English learner, you might think, do we need both twos? Well, yeah, because the go to is you're going to the location, but then want to go, you need the to between want and the other verb. So yes, you have to repeat to, right? Um, you might learn, about the preposition to in terms of formal grammar and this and that, and like, oh, this is all the definitions and this is what it means. But that's not really going to help you because if you just have this phrase, I want to go to the beach, you have a natural, real example that actually shows, oh, hey, sometimes there's two twos in the same sentence. That's fine. Um, and so you get used to it, right? You let your brain soak in the language. That's one of the best ways to learn grammar is it takes some time, but you keep reading, you keep listening. You don't have to speak. You will eventually have to speak if you want to be able to speak. But when it comes to learning grammar, speaking is active grammar, listening and reading is getting the passive knowledge of grammar. And so those are two separate skill sets in language, two separate things. And so keep that in mind. Um, but in terms of actually like understanding and knowing the grammar and like knowing what sounds good and stuff, that comes mostly from soaking your brain in the language with a lot of reading. I mean, a lot of reading, a lot of listening. Doesn't have to be both of those. It could be one or the other, but um, the listening is way more important than the reading. Reading is super, super good, super useful. I'm not saying don't read. Definitely read if you like reading. But remember the pronunciation, right? When you read, you don't have the pronunciation. Now, if you have the audiobook to go with the text, that's the best because now you actually get to hear how it's pronounced. Of course, if it's recorded by a British speaker, then you're listening to British English, and I mean, it's better than nothing, but ideally, you want to be listening to more of an American source. I want to write, I've missed this comment. I want to write a novel in English. I think it's going to take some time. Yeah, it might. um, yeah, that's why I started to worry about pronunciation. Exactly. Yeah. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, um, it's not the worst thing. If you want to have really good pronunciation or near native pronunciation or native pronunciation, which is possible, very difficult, but possible, um, then reading without listening, it's not the end of the world. It's not the worst thing, but you're gonna have your own accent reinforcing, right? And you're seeing all these words, all this grammar, you're getting so much exposure, but in your head, you're hearing your own accent. Um, and again, that doesn't mean that, oh, you're never going to be able to have good pronunciation. I mean, you're going to get used to hearing the language in your accent in your head. Um, and so theoretically, it might take you longer to get that perfect pronunciation. This is one reason why I recommend, right, pronunciation and ear training. These are the physical mechanical basis of language production, spoken language production. Reading and writing are based on the spoken language with the speaking and the listening, but they have a completely different base, right? Where the base of spoken speech is sound, which you then have to produce and perceive. The basis of written language is written symbols, not sounds. So they have two completely different bases. Um, and I always recommend, even if you don't care about pronunciation, because it helps everything. It will help your listening, it will help everything else. Start with pronunciation. And if you're intermediate and you're here listening to this, because I mean, obviously, if you're a beginner, you probably can't understand me with how fast I'm speaking. It's not too late. You can go and you can start adding in more of the pronunciation, learning more, doubling down on it, and really trying to train your ear. And it's going to help you so much in every other area. But you don't have to have like perfect ears and perfect pronunciation before you start reading. That would be ridiculous, right? At the end of the day, you got to do what is most interesting to you, is going to make you move forward, right? That's the thing. And you say the videos about E and I already made a big impact on my mental pronunciation. See, exactly, exactly. Whereas before, um, it like maybe you weren't even aware of that, like that there were even really two different sounds there. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't, but a lot of English learners aren't because they physically, literally, their ears do not perceive that second vowel sound. And that's natural because when you were a baby, your brain didn't need that sound. um, I understand you clearly. The pronunciation and grammar are my weak points. Yeah. Um, so you already developed pretty good listening. If you would have started with pronunciation, your listening probably would have improved a lot faster, and a lot more, smoothly. Um, but that's just the thing, right? When we talk about these fundamental units of like sound or written characters, if we're talking about spoken language or written language, I guess in written language it might be a little bit different, but it's not absolutely required that you study all of the details of that fundamental level in order to make progress in the skills above them that are based on them, the speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and then the grammar, vocabulary, which are the knowledge areas. So but starting from that physical mechanical basis, especially in language, because you already know how to use your mouth and ears, but based on a different sound set. So it's even more important when you learn a foreign language compared to, say, learning a musical instrument where it's completely new to you, that you relearn how to perceive sounds, because your baby brain said, I don't need these sounds, I only need these sounds. And it got really good at identifying those sounds. Um, okay. Yeah, YouTube asked if I wanted to show that for obvious reasons. So yeah, beach and bitch, for pronunciation's sake, I'll go ahead and say it, was the same sound. Yeah, and that's a common problem. Very common problem, right? Same thing with sheet and shit. Same thing. So again, I really preach pronunciation. That's why I've been focusing so much on pronunciation on this channel. I've had some other things here and there, and I'm trying to do some other things also, because I this isn't just a pronunciation channel. But I'm really focusing so hard on that now to get the pronunciation course done, because that is one of the biggest pillars of my channel and like my entire approach to language and just to learning skills in general. Like, you have to get that fundamental mechanical unit if you really want to get the biggest benefit for everything else above it. Because all of spoken language is, whether you're talking about grammar, vocabulary, whatever, it's all based on sound. If we're talking about speaking and listening, it's all based on sound. So why would you not start with sound? That's the place you start. And most people either don't care about it or they don't even think about it because it's the most obvious thing, right? Of course, words are made of sound. We don't realize it because it's what it's made of. Just like writing, when you read and write, of course they're made of written letters, right? You don't really think about that because it's just what it is. It's like, okay, I have to learn these letters. Um, Again, writing's a little bit different because you kind of can't write if you don't know the letters. But with speaking, you can try to speak without the right sounds. It's just you might not be understood. Um, Going back to this. Um, Show, yeah. Um, it is so stupid, yes. There's a number of things, especially with pronunciation, um, but also with grammar and with some other things, and just sometimes how things are explained, that aren't necessarily wrong. Some of them I would say are just straight up wrong, but they're like maybe confusing or misleading, or or like for example, I don't know if you've seen the video yet where I say don't worry about long what was it? Was it long vowels and short vowels? Yeah, long vowel the terms long vowels and short vowels. Because that is technically accurate, technically, linguistically speaking, but it's so misleading because English being stress timed, any particular vowel could be pronounced louder and longer or shorter and quieter. And when an English teacher says, okay, we have these long vowels and these short vowels, and then you have a case like this where they say, okay, say this word with a shorter version of the same sound. If you do a shorter version of the same sound, you're going to get more of an unstressed word, but it's a stressed word. You can't just say like, right, so, okay, uh, so the E in beach would be, if it's supposed to be longer, okay, beach, beach. I want to go to the beach. That sounds so unnatural. So unnatural. Like nobody would say it that way. Or if I say the second word with a short E, beach, beach, beach. That's exactly how most English learners try to say it, and it's wrong. It's not an E sound. It doesn't matter if you make it shorter, it's not the right sound. So yeah, these are things that bug me so much. And this is one of the bigger reasons why I have this channel in the first place, because there's just I don't know. I don't know. Some of it is dialectical variation, and if they're teaching general American, then that's fine. I can't necessarily say, okay, this is wrong and that's wrong, because that is how people speak. And there are some details where general American might be a little bit easier in some cases, but the way I teach you, I think, is overall the easiest way. And it's how I speak. So of course I'm going to teach you that way. But there's some things like this where I'm just like, I can't imagine any native speaker, even like in British English, saying bitch with an E sound. It just it does. I would never. I'd be super surprised if I ever heard anybody saying that. Um, After your video, I just started to notice that it sounded words and phrases. Before your video, everything was just E. Exactly. Um, your brain might have a predisposition, because like people who are talented with being able to like do pronunciation and hear sounds in like new languages and stuff, some of it is practice and skill. Like any talent is always secondary. Like it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. But people who are talented, like me, I would say I'm kind of talented in pronunciation of languages, because I can have probably anybody in almost any language give me a word, repeat it a few times, I can repeat after them and I'll say it almost perfectly. It's a little trick I like to do with some of my students. um, but I think largely that's rooted in, as I was saying, your baby brain. When you're a baby, your brain can hear all sounds. As long as like your neurotypical developing brain, you don't have some sort of weird brain issue. If you're average neurotypical brain, then you can hear all sounds that a human being might make in a language, right? That includes clicks and whistles and throat sounds, all kinds of stuff. But over the first, I don't know the exact time frame, I forget, it's maybe a year or two, whatever, your brain starts focusing in just on the sounds that it needs. So the people who are and it literally prunes away the connections to be able to hear new sounds, because that's what we're designed for. It's like, okay, I got the sounds I need to communicate in this language, right? And historically we didn't have a bunch of different languages between each other, right? And so your brain just, that's what it does. It's like, I don't need to hear other sounds because these are the sounds I need. But some people who have this natural talent for pronunciation, my theory, maybe this has been proven, I haven't read it anywhere, but my theory is that those individuals' brains didn't prune away those connections as well as, say, most people. And so then you go to learn a foreign language, and maybe you can't hear every sound right away. Like when I was learning German, there were a couple sounds that I actually couldn't hear the difference between. I really had to focus on minimal pairs, and it took me a little while to hear the difference between. But for the most part, my brain picks up the differences in sound pretty easily. And as long as I'm focusing. If I'm not really focusing, then maybe not. Um, but it seems my brain sort of kept a bit of that ability just for whatever reason. It just didn't prune away all the ability to do that. And it's something that you can regrow, right? Our brains are very plastic. We know this from modern science. And so that's why you can retrain your ears. And that's why I talk about train your ears, don't trust your eyes. Um, so whether you have the talent or not, it doesn't really matter. It's just if you have the talent, it's going to be a lot easier and faster. If you don't have the talent, it's going to take longer. But in your case, you saw my video pointing it out, and that tells me that now that you can kind of you start noticing the difference. Um, I mean, I don't know what you saw before. Maybe it's just the way I explained it or something, but your brain might have a little bit of um, I guess, talent in a way. I've had some students who are quite talented for pronunciation, and when I teach them pronunciation, it goes so fast, just so fast. Um, it's amazing. So, everybody's a little bit different. It's no big deal. But anyway, I want to get to really answering your question here. So being caught on all these tangents, sidetracked. So we talked about priorities, your goals, things like that. Focusing on phrases rather than rules, but some rules are really useful to use or to learn. The 80-20 principle of identifying, what is the most beneficial part of, in this case, grammar. Or pronunciation, it would be vowels, if you don't know vowels yet. In grammar, I mean, that includes like the major tenses, things like that. So you identify those things. I talk a little bit about that in my book. There are things like the point of view stories, which, like the black cat. I don't know if you saw the black cat video. That's from my book, The Black Cat, which I'm probably gonna, as long as people enjoy them. I've gotten positive feedback so far that people like it. So I'm gonna post the past tense, future tense, and present perfect tense for The Black Cat Part 1. But these point of view stories that sort of like change tenses, and I also change between third person and first person in the exercises. It's designed not for pronunciation. You can use it for pronunciation if you want, but it's designed for speaking because you only have 3 seconds to answer. So if you're talking about activating grammar, not necessarily just like learning new grammar, but being able to use the grammar easily without really thinking, this is one good way to do that by yourself without a speaking partner. Of course, it's not going to solve everything, but it's going to get you really, really, like, if you can't speak very well now, it's going to take you quite a ways in your ability to speak and respond. So it's designed for speaking and being able to use the grammar. Because remember, there's passive, I know the grammar, and there's active, I can actually accurately use the grammar. And we have to keep both of those in mind. So point of view stories like that are super, super useful. There's some other resources, blah, blah, blah. Yes. I think that was not the most recent video, but the video before that I posted. That's just the present tense. Probably kind of boring, but you can go through it if you want. And then I'm going to be posting the past tense one of it, hopefully in the next couple days. I have another video I have to post first. Let's see here. Yeah, compare and contrast your native language grammar. Don't get too caught in details, right? Really don't worry too much about details. Details are for advanced learners and experts. Okay. Details are for advanced learners and experts. Depending on where you are, depending on what you know, your grammar knowledge. I mean, you're communicating fairly well. I mean, you have some broken grammar here and there, but you're doing quite well in the chat. So that tells me you know quite a bit of grammar, and that's very nice. So depending on where you are and what you need, you might want to start looking at things that are a little more detailed. But again, don't get caught in all the little tiny details. Like the smaller the detail, the less useful it will be, unless you already know the bigger details, right? So from beginner to advanced, you want to focus on biggest details like tenses and things. Intermediate is more, some of the other details, medium-sized details, and then advanced is when you start looking at, oh yeah, okay, there's this, like the articles and usually prepositions. although I have my logic of prepositions course that is not completed. You have the logic of prepositions book. You can go through that if you want. And that actually brings up another point. The way that I like to look at grammar, the way that I like to teach grammar, if possible, is don't try to memorize rules. Try to feel the grammar. And that's like my channel is called, right, English Hacks, but then it says learn English better, right? It's think like a native, learn English better. And I put think like a native, which is kind of a controversial statement. Nobody's mentioned anything yet, surprisingly. But I wasn't sure if I should put think like a native or feel English like a native. That doesn't seem to work quite as well. But the logic of prepositions, I used logic, but the logic is secondary. I used a very logical approach to get to the feeling behind each preposition that's underneath each preposition in the mind of a native speaker. You have the same thing in Portuguese, right? You might think like, oh, the Portuguese preposition de or something, or en or whatever. Like, oh, there's no logic to it. Like, you use it here, here, here. These are such different cases. But because I actually got the idea from when I was learning German, I was like, are German prepositions logical? And then I applied it to English, and I was like, oh yeah, huh, look, I discovered this. And the more I think about the logical prepositions, the more like random examples I encounter and stuff, I'm just like, oh my god, like I actually discovered something. It's amazing. I'm more and more convinced, every day that not every single day, but you get what I mean. Like all the time, I'm more and more convinced that that idea is accurate. And it's sort of a way to hack it, right? That's why it's called English hacks. You train your ears. That shouldn't be a hack. That should be standard language learning practice, but it's not. So it's a hack. Train your ears, guys. It's the magical thing. But also when you're learning grammar, especially grammar like prepositions, instead of memorizing a bunch of rules, which aren't really going to help you communicate, it's going to help you understand, but it's not going to help you communicate like an actual speech. You really, really want to feel it, just like a native does. In Portuguese, you feel prepositions, you feel the articles, you feel, this tense is used in this case. And, if you change the tense just a little, to this, maybe it has a slightly different feeling. Natives have those feelings. And you can hack into those feelings because every language has its own personality. That's something I'm going to be talking about a lot more later on this channel once I get all the pronunciation main details done. I never studied English grammar. I just try to feel what's right, but I read and listen a lot. Yes, exactly. So read and listen, lots of exposure, lots and lots of exposure. The traditional exposure course, the input course, well, not course, but way of learning. That definitely can get you very far. And that's what many polyglots do. Not all polyglots. Polyglots have different approaches, but especially Steve Kaufman. I talked about him on this channel. He talks about like reading a lot, listening a lot. He's the guy who created Link, the lingq.com. And he's like read, listen, read, listen, read, listen. He'll spend like 10 months just like completely listening and reading as much as he can. And he says he really only has like an hour a day. But he uses Link and he uses, his time effectively and stuff. And if he's, doing dishes or whatever, he'll be, listening and stuff, just not studying it. So he's soaking his brain in the language. And then after about, say, 8 to 12 months or so, 10 months, he'll start speaking. And he knows that you have to speak a lot, speak a lot, speak a lot to be able to speak. But he likes to get the understanding down so he doesn't have to worry about that in the conversation. That's his approach that he prefers. And that's a perfectly fine approach. It's a really, really good approach. And he also doesn't focus too much on grammar. He says like, oh, I might flip through a grammar book here and there. And then, after a couple months, of listening a lot and reading a lot, I might go back through that grammar book and flip through some things. Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. That makes sense now. But it's not that he ignores grammar, but it's not a big focus. And that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. It sounds like you sort of managed to go down a really good track with this. And you could definitely build up a feeling for that, but the natural exposure route, it takes so much longer to build up the feeling because for your native language, right? Of course, your baby brain is different than your adult brain, and there are some differences. Adults can actually learn languages better in many cases, in many ways. This whole idea that babies, oh, it's so easy for babies, it's actually largely like not, it's a myth. It's just you don't really remember. But there are differences in the brain that make it maybe a little bit easier to learn in certain ways. Uh, where am I going with this? I think that's what is holding me back to improve my English skills. Yeah, absolutely. Then the black cat story, or well, the speak English easily with point of view stories. That's going to help you so much because it's about all about activating grammar and being able to use it. But yes, speaking is its own skill. That's what a lot of people don't realize. Speaking is its own skill. Okay. Imagine playing the guitar or the piano. Like you could be able to read music, you could be able to, listen to music and say, okay, he's pushing this note and that note and that note, or it's this chord or that chord or whatever it is. But then you go and you sit in front of, the piano or pick up a guitar, and you can't do anything. Right? You have the theory, you even have the listening skills, but you can't do anything because you don't, number one, you don't have the physical mechanics. But even if you did have the physical mechanics, you haven't practiced, oh, this is how you make this chord, right? This is how it's physically created on this instrument. Um, Speaking is its own skill. There's the production of a skill and the reception or the understanding of, what you're hearing or seeing or, whatever it is. They're two different things and they do affect each other. But at the end of the day, you have to speak a lot if you want to be able to speak. That doesn't mean you have to speak with other people necessarily. There are things you can do to speak with yourself, and there are things like the point of view stories that can help with that. But there's no avoiding it. You have to speak a lot. Okay, so that's definitely true. So I said to you that I'm using the Elsa English app. It uses AI voice recognition and seems pretty good. Gives some good feedback on your pronunciation. I wanted to have your feedback on it when you have some time to check the app to see if it really would help. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. Hopefully, I remember that. Elsa English. Yeah, I'll probably remember that. But yeah, the AI. I mean, AI is getting a lot better. I'm still really skeptical of it to be like 100 because I like things to be 100% accurate. Like if I don't know that it's going to be like 100% of the time give me a 100% accurate answer, then I'm just like why bother? Like I can just go talk to a native speaker and they can actually tell me, oh, was it accurate or not? But AI is getting there for sure, and if it is that good, then that's fantastic. Um, you know, because like that's the thing. If you're going to get feedback, it should be accurate feedback. Otherwise, you're trying to improve on something that's not accurate to begin with, right? Um, that's why I don't like Google Translate because these days Google Translate is really good, but it's still not perfect, right? And because it's still not perfect, any particular thing that I might put into Google Translate, if I were to use it, might be wrong. And then I might put that into a flashcard, and then I might memorize that wrong. And I mean, it's okay, you can always unlearn things later, but it's that my personal thing is I just prefer not to use tools like that because I can't 100% trust them. So, um, yeah, there's other things you can do, other techniques. Go through the How to Learn a Language book in the grammar section. You're going to get lots of great ideas. Reverse translation is a great exercise. Rewording exercises, learning from your mistakes. These are ideas, but you have to sort of put them together. And yes, feedback is so important. Yes, italki is pretty good. That's where I found all of my language exchange partners for Spanish, a little bit for German, a little bit for Japanese. So I think I have a link. Yeah, I should have a link in the description, unless I deleted it from the live stream description to italki, and we'll both. You don't have to use it. I'm not trying to sell anything here, but if you use that link to sign up for italki, I don't know if you already signed up, and you take one class, which again you could just find a language exchange partner for free. But if you're going to take any classes with anybody, And if you use my link, we both get $10 in italki credits. So that's a win-win. Um, but anyway, yeah, we've been going for about 2.5 hours. I'm gonna have to go to the bathroom soon. And I think it's we probably, I mean, I don't know, we have 7 people. We're doing all right, but my voice is also throat's starting to get a little sore. Yeah, so I'm really surprised we have 7 people, especially since like you're the only one talking that. Um, but to summarize that, I mean, there's many different things you can do. Try to feel the language, and when you try to feel the language, that's the last point I was trying to get to is the exposure over time, right? That will allow you to build up the feeling. But if you compare that to your native language, like you had, even just in like your first 5 years, you were constantly surrounded by the language. You didn't have to worry about any other language, right? You're just Portuguese, 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 right? Listening to it, trying to use it after, maybe a couple of years, getting the grammar, it's becoming part of you, right? Um, and part of that is due to your baby brain. There's a little bit of difference there. But just the sheer amount of constant exposure to the language, it's really hard to get that in a foreign language. And you don't have to move to another country to, reach a super advanced level in a language. It helps, but you don't have to. Especially just to reach like a conversational fluency, you definitely don't have to. But to get that feeling a lot faster, right? To sort of go from to bridge that gap of time, say your first 10 years of living speaking Portuguese, you had such exposure to Portuguese that it's an automatic natural part of you that you feel, right? um, your exposure to English, it doesn't really matter how much you read, how much you listen to, unless you are living in an English speaking country, constantly listening to it, no Portuguese at all, for the same amount of time, say 5 to 10 years, right? After that amount of time, yeah, you're probably, as long as you're paying attention and always trying to like improve, you're not just like, oh, okay, I understand it enough and I'm just not going to fix my mistakes. But as long as you're really trying to learn in that amount of time, you can really start to feel a lot of things and get to a very, very high level. But not everybody can do that, and that's fine because you don't have to do that. With my approach of trying to hack the feeling, right, using logic and stuff like in the logic of prepositions, that basically takes that sort of 5 to 10 year window of building up the feeling and reduces it to less than 1 year. I developed that course testing it on students, and especially phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs have to be logical because otherwise a particular preposition with a particular verb wouldn't make the sense that it does. It wouldn't have the meaning that it does, right? It's because of the meaning of the verb plus the feeling of the preposition that creates a new meaning. That in itself is proof enough to me. But for most of the students that I did the course with, it was just, maybe 4 or 5 students as I was developing it. By the time we finished the course, I want to say 80% of them, so like three or four out of five, uh, were starting to spontaneously use phrasal verbs that they had never seen before. That is what I'm talking about. Exposure is one thing, right? Where you're exposed to a phrasal verb a certain number of times, you know what it means. Maybe it has a couple different meanings. Eventually, you kind of start trying to use it. That's one thing. But to go from not even knowing a phrasal verb exists to spontaneously using it in context correctly, that is my approach. Okay. Um, I know, right? These are all the things I was thinking of when I was naming the channel. And then here I am talking about pronunciation, and people are probably like, why is it called English Hacks? um, yes, makes. Good correction there. Very nice. That by the way, that first person, or not first person, third person singular s, he makes, she makes, it makes, that mistake is a mistake that's going to stay with you for a while. I've always tried to find a way to fix it, and I think I found a way to fix it from a beginner course, but you're not a beginner. And I haven't finished that course, so just know that that's very natural, and I like that you're correcting yourself because it tells me that it's not automatic, but you're aware of it, right? And the more you kind of stay on it, it's going to start fixing itself. So you're on track with that. Good. Anyway, yeah. So personalities, hacking, different techniques and tools. There's a bunch of different things you can do. Definitely stay tuned in the future for more videos and stuff. Once, as I said, once I finish the pronunciation course, I am definitely going to be talking more about grammar and vocabulary and all these different hacks and techniques and stuff. Um, so yeah. But anyway, yes, we are going to finish for today. I really appreciate that there are 6 people here. 6 people. Thank you very much for sticking around. I know it's dark; you can't even see me at this point. Um, really, really appreciate you guys sticking around. I hope that it was useful for you. We have live stream every week on Thursdays. Check Twitter for the exact time. And of course, if you want to support me on Patreon, you can. You don't have to. But thank you very much to everybody who is here or who was here. Thank you, especially Elmi, for keeping the chat going. And I will see you guys later. Bye. Yes, no problem. So much, actually.